Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 500 library systems across the US, Canada, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors and presenters that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so honored to have award-winning journalist and author Charles Duhigg with us to chat about his best-selling book, Supercommunicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. I know everyone's ready to get started, so am I, but for any newcomers, I need to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, so thank you for doing that. But please keep in mind that you can also submit questions during the talk by clicking the questions button that's just below the live stream video. There are a lot of you tuning in today, so we will get to as many questions as time allows. And don't worry, if you have to leave early for any reason whatsoever, a link will be emailed to all registrants in about 24 hours for the recording. Now to formally introduce our guest for today. Charles Duhigg is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and the author of Supercommunicators: The Power of Habit and Smarter, Faster, Better. A graduate of Harvard Business School and Yale University, he's the winner of the National Academies of Sciences, National Journalism, and George Polk Awards. He writes for The New Yorker and the New York Times Magazine and was the founding host of the Slate podcast How To with Charles Duhigg. Welcome, Charles. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. This is a real treat.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. You know, I have to
Excellent.
Flash the book here for a minute. This beautiful cover, it's very recognizable. So I listened to it originally, and then I went out to get the paperback, and I brought my daughter to the bookstore and was like, can you help me find a cover that starts with an S at the top and it's rainbow all the way down? And she was 5. She was able to find it immediately. So
good. I'm glad to hear that. That's wonderful.
Probably not in your demographic of what you're going for, but
that's
it was
true
helpful for me.
That's true.
Okay, so we do have several people that tend to tune in and they're interested to learn more about the book, but haven't quite read it yet or finished it. So can you give everyone a quick summary of Supercommunicators, what it's about, and maybe tell us what or who is a supercommunicator?
So we're all supercommunicators. And in fact, I'll ask you a question to sort of demonstrate this. When you're having a bad day and you come home and you want to call someone who you know talking to them is just going to make you feel better, do you know who you would call? Does that person pop into your mind?
Yes.
Yeah, who is it?
My sister.
Your sister. Okay. So for you, your sister is a supercommunicator, and you're probably a supercommunicator right back to her. We all, you know what the right question to ask is. You know how to prove that you're listening. You know when she wants advice and when she just wants kind of a shoulder to cry on. We are all supercommunicators at one time or another. It's a natural thing. But there are some people who are consistent supercommunicators. Some people can be that person to anyone. They know how to connect with almost anyone. And what we've learned is that communication is just a set of skills. And if you learn and you practice those skills and you make them into habits, then you can connect and you can have a great conversation with anyone that you want to, no matter how different you are or what topic you're discussing.
I love that. The book is so good. And also the real-time examples that you give throughout every single chapter really help bring the rules and the tips that you're teaching everyone together. Victoria from Massanutten Regional Library says, I've read the book, found it incredibly helpful. Thank you. But what inspired you to write this book?
I think that the thing that inspired me, well, first of all, thank you for your question. And thank you for the kind words on the book. The thing that really convinced me to write this was that I felt like I was not being as great a communicator as I wanted to be. You know, I'd fall into this bad pattern where I would come home from work. I was working at the New York Times at that point, and it would be a long, hard day at work. And I'd start complaining to my wife about my day. And I'd say, you know, my boss doesn't appreciate me and my coworkers don't realize what a genius I am. And I would sort of just go on. And she would offer me some really good advice. She'd say something like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of being able to hear her advice, I would get even more upset. And I'd say, like, why aren't you supporting me? You're supposed to be like outraged on my behalf. You're supposed to be telling me how great I am. I'm imagining that anyone who's listening, this sounds like a very familiar situation to you. And so I went to these researchers and I asked them, what's going on here? Like, why do I keep making this mistake and falling into this trap? And they said, well, we're glad you showed up because we're living through this golden age of understanding communication for really the first time. Because of advances in neural imaging and data collection, we can see what's happening inside people's brains as they're having a conversation. And they said, one of the big things that we've learned is that when you're having a discussion, you think you know what that discussion is about, right? You think you're talking about, where to go on vacation or what happened to you today or what movie you want to see. But actually, they said, if we look inside your brain during that discussion, you're actually having multiple different kinds of conversations. And in general, these conversations, they tend to fall into one of three buckets, right? There's these practical conversations where people are making plans together or solving problems. But then there's also these conversations that are emotional, where I tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize. And then finally, there's social conversations, which is about how we relate to each other and the identities that are important to us. And what the researchers said is they said, look, all three of these conversations are all really important and they're all equally legitimate. And actually, during a discussion, you might move through all three, right? You start with practical and then you go to emotional and then social and back to practical. They said, but what we've discovered is if you're not having the same kind of conversation at the same time with the person you're talking to, then you can't really hear each other. And you'll definitely won't feel connected to each other. And within psychology, this has become known as the matching principle.
Okay.
What it says is that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Patrick wants to know, though, are some people just born to be super communicators, or can the rest of us also learn these skills and be just as adept?
Now, it's a great question, Patrick. And the answer is no one is born to be a super communicator. Like we tend to sort of describe this the wrong way. We say things like, oh, that person has the gift of the gab, right? Or they were born with a silver tongue. It turns out if you go talk to people who are the best communicators and you ask them, have you always been good at communication? They inevitably will tell you no. They'll say things like, I had trouble making friends when I was in high school. And so I had to really figure out how kids talk to each other to come out of my shell, or my parents got divorced when I was a kid and I had to be the peacemaker between them. What we find again and again and again is that people who are good communicators, people who are consistent super communicators, they are the people who study communication, who think about communication. And all they do is they just learn a couple of skills, but once they've learned those skills, they can start using them to connect with anyone around them. Mm-hmm. So it's something any of us can learn.
It's like your example in chapter 1 with the CIA agent.
Yeah.
He was not a super communicator in the beginning, but being directed through his training, he was able to become one. That was so fascinating.
That's exactly right. And so much of his training was not only what you learn in a classroom, but also practicing it, right? When he was trying to recruit this young woman, Yasmin, and he would take her out to meals and he would try and, impress her with how worldly he was, and talk about, and when he finally admitted that he was working for the CIA, he talked to her about the fact that he was trying to, that they both wanted the same thing. They wanted her country to get better for women. And each time he did this, it just didn't work. Like she would get scared and she would get freaked out and she'd say, I don't want to talk to you. This is really dangerous. Yeah. They only were able to really hear each other and connect with each other when he became honest and vulnerable. And he talked about how like he was certain he was going to get fired because he was so bad at this job that he had wanted his entire life. And that he understood how she was feeling, that like he was also scared. And he just felt like there was nothing he could do to make the world a better place. And it was when they were both honest with each other and authentic and vulnerable, that's when finally they could hear each other. And she ended up becoming one of the best assets for the CIA in the Middle East for the next 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how he even got into the CIA was because of his own vulnerability, which...
That's exactly right.
It's something that a lot of your examples throughout the book have in common.
That's exactly right.
Carol from Findlay Hancock County Public Library also loves the examples that you give in the book, the real life stories, and wants to know how you went about identifying them, like choosing the
Well,
words
so
that you wanted to put in.
yeah, as a reporter, I spend most of my time trying to figure out what the right narratives are to use. And for every one that I end up writing, there's dozens that I researched and that I reported and I talked to people that never end up on the page. And so oftentimes it's just a matter of calling maybe an academic who's written on a topic I like and asking them, what's your favorite anecdote? Like who have you bumped into that really uses this in the world? And eventually, if you make enough of those phone calls, someone says, there's this one person you should talk to. And once you do, you realize that they have a great story that you can use.
That's amazing. You used all the right ones, I think. So Jerry is saying, is there a time we should exit a conversation instead of using the matching principle and trying to match the person's type?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not enjoying a conversation, it's totally fine to exit it. There is no rule that says that you have to have a conversation that you don't want to have. And in fact, that this pressure that we sometimes place on ourselves to have conversations that we don't want to have, that's not a good pressure. And so I would say, if you're in a conversation and you want to be in that conversation, that's fantastic. But if you don't want to be in that conversation, it's okay to say, thank you so much. Listen, I got to go. I got to go talk to this person over here. Or, my kid's waiting for me to pick them up. It's an easy way to leave the conversation and you can walk away.
I'm wondering, to Mary's, the next question, Mary from Helen Kate Furness Free Library, if being in like a workplace scenario, talking to your supervisor or being the leader and someone being like, okay, I can't have this discussion right now and walking away from you. Mary says, what are ways to command respect and leadership in connecting instead of constantly being challenged and disrespected? So it feels like it's kind of the reverse there.
Well, I think, I think that when we're being challenged or disrespected, it might be because the other person feels like we're challenging them or disrespecting them, right? One of the things that's really important is what's known as active listening. We tend to think of listening as a passive activity that, I shut my mouth and I open my ears and I listen to what you're saying. But what we know is that that's actually the first step, but not the end of listening. What's really important is that as we're listening to someone, that we prove to them that we're listening, that we ask follow-up questions, or we sort of say, oh, you mentioned this thing before, and I'm wondering, like, how does it relate to what you just said? When we do that, we're proving that we're paying attention, and it shows the other person that we are at least listening to them and probably respecting what they have to say a little bit. And when we do that, when we become a great listener, they tend to, just out of a natural social obligation, there's an instinct for social reciprocity that exists in all of our heads. They tend to listen to us in return. And so the thing I would say is, if it's a jerk, I don't know that there's any kind of like conversational jujitsu that makes a jerk not into a jerk. But if they aren't a jerk, but you feel like they're challenging you or they're not respecting you, it might be worth taking a second and saying, how can I prove to this person that I really want to hear them, that I'm really trying to have a conversation with them?
Okay, good advice. So chapter 2 of the book focuses on identifying what's this conversation really about. And one of the main goals is deciding the rules of the discussion, and kind of the idea that there are rules that we need to cognitively remember to put into place for a conversation may seem a bit novel to some of us. How do we train ourselves to think about discussions in this way with rules in mind?
Well, we actually do it automatically,
Okay.
right? So in this conversation, for instance, we're not interrupting each other. And that's just a rule that there's plenty of other conversations where I do interrupt people and you interrupt people. And that's kind of the fun of the conversation, is you're talking over each other. But there's this kind of implicit rule that we decided on. Okay, so you'll say something and I'll say something, and we won't talk over each other that much, right? These rules emerge very, very organically. And it's not even like you have to think about them that hard. But when we're having a tough conversation, when it's that kind of conversation that sort of makes our stomach, clench up in knots, at those moments, it's actually really helpful to just, before you start having the conversation, to just spend like 10 seconds asking yourself, what are the rules that I think will help make this conversation go better? Right? Is this the type of thing where I should interrupt them or not? Should I let them go on talking as long as they want, and then prove that I'm listening to them, repeat back a little bit of what I heard them say and ask them if I got it right? When we are deliberate about the rules that we want to live by, the conversation tends to go better. And sometimes for the hardest conversations, we can start by just having a quick discussion about the rules and say, look, I know that we're going to talk about something that we both feel really strongly about. And I think one thing that would help is if we don't make it like personal attacks, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's okay to talk about ideas, but not, you always say this, or you believe that. Let's not make it personal. Is that okay? And I think that when we do that, the conversation goes much better because now we're on the same page. We're living by the same rules.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, you're finding out exactly what the person wants when you're stipulating right up front. I want to talk about this, but I don't want to feel this way.
Yeah, exactly.
So getting to what the conversation might really be about, or negotiating the terms, right? Which is the title of the chapter. Every conversation is negotiation.
Yeah, and what we know from research is that that's right. That when we start a conversation, oftentimes there's what's known as a quiet negotiation. And the goal of quiet negotiation is not to win, right? It's not to convince you that I'm smart and you're dumb, or I'm right and you're wrong. The goal of a quiet negotiation is simply to figure out what we both want out of this discussion. Mm-hmm. And maybe the answer is we just want to catch up with each other and like make each other laugh. Or maybe the answer is I want to convince you to support my proposal that I'm taking before the city council. Mm-hmm. Or I want to tell you how I'm feeling and I want you to understand. When we spend a little bit of time at the beginning of a conversation trying to figure out what each person wants, it helps that conversation go a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of the conversation going a lot better, Jacqueline says, how can you guide someone to communicate to you the way you want to be communicated with? Like you were saying, like wanting empathy with someone who's in problem-solving mode without it becoming awkward.
I mean, oftentimes the easiest way to do this is simply to say like, thank you for giving me some suggestions on how to solve that problem. I think what would be more helpful for me right now is just if I just know that you're listening to me and you care about me and you hear what I'm saying. We should never hesitate to say what our desires are from a conversation. There's when they teach teachers how to have conversations with kids in classrooms, they often tell them, okay, look, if a kid wants to talk to you about something, start the conversation by asking them, do you want to be helped? Do you want to be hugged? Or do you want to be heard? Which of course is the practical conversation, the emotional conversation, and the social conversation. And the nice thing about asking that question is that the kid knows exactly what they want, right? They can say like, no, I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to know that Jimmy's being really mean to me, right? I want to tattle on him. Hey, okay, you're just a kid who wants to be heard. That's all you need right now. It's what you want. And we can do the same things ourselves and say, thank you for trying to help me. I don't need you to help me right now. I just need a hug, or I need you to hear me. And I think when we do that, when we tell people what we want, they actually appreciate it. It's not awkward. It's a way of telling someone that you care about them enough that you want them to understand what you need right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the example with talking to children in that way, because I also think that children are much better than adults at asking questions as well.
Yeah.
And getting to the heart of what's going on. Just because they're so innocent. Excuse me. Felix from Southern New Hampshire University is saying, do you have any tips for neurodivergent folks who have plenty of interest in connection and who want to be able to excel, for example, in careers where communication and figuring out what people want from a conversation is tantamount, but who can struggle when trying to interface with new people or in new or very stimulating environments?
Yeah. So there's been a good amount of research done on folks who are neurodivergent and how they communicate and the communication challenges they can sometimes confront. And I've actually heard from a lot of readers who are neurodivergent who say things like, thank you, because I feel like this helped illustrate or helped reveal some things that I can think about and pay attention to and notice in conversations that I might not have seen before. Mm-hmm. I think in general, one of the things that happens in a conversation, and this is part of that quiet negotiation, is that we oftentimes tell the other person how we want to communicate, right? And so I think particularly for folks who are neurodivergent, it's fine to say something like, if you don't mind, I'm having trouble understanding exactly what you're feeling right now. And this is my fault. It's not your fault. It's just that, I process language differently. I'm a neurodivergent. Can you help explain to me exactly what you're trying to get to help me understand?
Mhm.
Right. I think the more honest we are, the more that we help the other person communicate with us. And the more it makes them sympathetic to things that we might miss. If you're someone who has trouble picking up on facial expressions, which happens, and then if we explain that to someone, they become more sympathetic to us. They don't think that we're ignoring them. They think that we're having trouble reading their face and understanding what they're feeling. And in each instance, this is a really positive impact. It's a way for us to bring ourselves more into the conversation. It's a way for us to be vulnerable. And the thing about vulnerability is that vulnerability almost always makes a conversation better. Now, we tend to misunderstand vulnerability. We think of it as like crying on someone's shoulder or talking about our parents. Vulnerability occurs simply when I tell you something you could judge about me. Because at that moment, and it might be something dumb, like I think Star Trek is better than Star Wars. And you think that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your entire life, but I don't care, right? That's not, we don't, the fact that we feel differently about this is not the biggest issue on earth. But when I tell you this thing that you could judge, my brain automatically, because of a pro-social instinct that's evolved over time, my brain automatically pays very close attention to how you react. And if the way that you react is that you react by, sorry, my phone is now going off, I apologize. If the way that you react is by not judging me, but instead withholding your judgment, and even more importantly, telling me something about yourself that I might judge, then suddenly we will feel closer to each other. And so introducing this vulnerability is a very, very powerful way of helping a conversation get better, whether you're neurodivergent or not.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking a lot about feelings, and Eddie wants to know how do you see emotional intelligence playing a role in being a super communicator other than vulnerability? Yeah.
I think emotional intelligence is really important, but we tend to misunderstand what emotional intelligence is, right? We think that emotional intelligence is something that like only the greatest communicators can do. Emotional intelligence simply means I spend time, I just remind myself to try and notice what you're feeling. That doesn't mean that you're going to be great at it, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to get every feeling exactly right. But if you go into a conversation and you say to yourself in your own head, okay, look, one of my goals in this conversation is I just want to try and understand what the other person's feeling. Maybe the words coming out of their mouth, maybe they're saying that like they feel that they're saying, I'm so calm, I'm not upset about this. But I look at their body, I sort of see them crossing their arms and they're frowning a little bit. I think actually they're not feeling great about what we're talking about. If you just pay a little bit of attention to that, that is what makes you emotionally intelligent. And it's not that some people are born more emotionally intelligent than others. It's entirely a skill, and it's a skill that we develop simply by reminding ourselves to pay attention to how people are feeling and to ask ourselves, do I understand what they're going through right now? And if not, to ask questions and say, look, I want to understand how this affected you. Can you tell me, like, how did it make you feel when you heard that? That's how we become emotionally intelligent.
Sounds like there's a lot of introspection going on there as well, self-exploration, and how much you want to connect with people. And John from Jefferson County Public Library saying, in my mind, a super communicator is simply someone who values connection over status. How do we reconcile this in a culture that rewards those who turn all their connections into potential transactions in the pursuit of status?
Well, I don't think those people who do that, I don't think they succeed very well in the long term, right? I'm sure everyone who's listening to this, you probably appreciate people who want to connect with you more genuinely, right? If you're at a party and there's that guy, every time you talk to him, he's like, how's your kids? And then he tries to sell you life insurance or something like that.
Yeah.
You're gonna stay away from that guy. You're gonna go over to this woman over here who, like, you had a lovely conversation with last time about kids. You both have kids the same age. She told you that she was struggling a little bit with, like, one of her kids' behavior issues, but you want to find out, has that gotten better, and tell her a little bit about your own kids. being genuine, having a great conversation, being a super communicator, it is like a superpower. I mean, if you think about it, communication is Homo sapiens' superpower. It's the thing that makes us different from every other species, the thing that lets us build families and villages and companies and aircraft carriers and video game consoles. Communication is at the core of what makes humans special. And we know when someone wants to have a real conversation with us and when they just want to like kind of use us or to have us listen to their stories. You know at that party when someone asks you, where'd you go on vacation? And you realize halfway through your answer, they don't care where you went on vacation. They just want you to ask them where they went on vacation so they can brag about the yacht that they were on and all the fancy people that they were hanging out with. We all pick up on this. We know it immediately.
Yeah.
And the key is the more that we commit ourselves to being a super communicator, to having real, authentic, vulnerable conversations, the better those conversations are going to go.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, where'd you go on vacation? And halfway through, they're not listening. There's a restaurant that I like to go to, not for this reason, but the owner will always come by and say, how are things going? And then walk off. So at this point, it's kind of funny, but it reminded me of that. David from Glendale Library Arts and Culture saying, in Supercommunicators, you describe how connection and emotional precision can transform difficult conversations, especially through vulnerability. In other frameworks, like those from negotiation trainers or deal makers like Oren Klaff, there's more focus on things like frame control, cognitive triggers, and managing status. What do you think about the relationship between those approaches and your own? Are they speaking to different contexts, or do they reflect deeper differences in how we define effective communication?
Well, so I think in some cases, when we talk to negotiators or when we talk to people who are giving sales advice, a lot of them they're not actually looking to have a conversation, right? They're looking to kind of persuade you to buy their thing or to take the price that you're offering. But that being said, what we know about the best negotiators and the best salespeople is that they are really good conversationalists. And it's not because they can use the tricks of conversation to try and nudge someone in a certain direction. It's because they're so personable and they're so easy to talk to that the other person oftentimes reveals what they actually want. You know, you start by saying, oh, I definitely want a red car. That's all I care about. And then you have a conversation and it turns out you've got 2 kids. And, you know, sometimes like you worry about the kids in the back seat. Like, is there enough safety devices for them? By having a real conversation, suddenly I can say to you, look, what you came in here saying is you wanted a red car. But what I hear you saying is that you want a red car that's safe, that has room for your kids in the back, that as they get older, it's going to have room for their sports equipment and taking their friends to games. Am I hearing you correctly? Am I understanding what you're actually looking for? At that moment, it's a lot easier to make the sale, right? Because now I know what you want. But it's not because I like tricked you into revealing anything. And it's not because I tricked you into believing me and sort of hypnotized you. It's because I had a real conversation and I learned a little bit more about you.
Yeah. Sound advice. Joe is saying, what is a polite way to get someone to stop interrupting / over speaking to have a more mutual conversation? Really kind of gets to the heart of connecting amid conflict in chapter 5.
Yeah. So look, sometimes there are some people who they don't want to be super communicators. They love to hear themselves talk. And I don't know that there's a great way to jujitsu those people into being something that they're not. I think oftentimes our best answer is to simply say, oh, this was interesting. Thank you so much. I got to go talk to that guy in the corner. And we just have the conversation and we walk away. But I think that one of the things that we can do is we can model very ostentatiously the behavior that we want to see. So oftentimes people will ask me, what happens like if I'm the person who like I ask question after question and the other person I'm talking to, they never ask questions of me. What should I do? And my answer is what you should do is you should take a second and say, oh my gosh, I've been asking you so many questions. I'm sure you have a ton of questions for me. Let me stop asking you questions and give you a chance to ask me some questions, right? That's a very graceful way of doing it. And what you'll find is that they have questions for you. They're they're maybe a little socially awkward. Maybe they don't know how to ask questions. Maybe it feels uncomfortable to them. But when you invite them to do so, they suddenly have a bunch of questions for you. So I think one of the things that we can do is we can just kind of announce how we want a conversation to unfold. And in doing so, we invite the other person to meet us, to join us, and to be part of that dialogue.
What about when it's an online conversation? So Mary from Kalamazoo Public Library is asking if these principles in the book work with online communication.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a chapter in the book about an experiment that was done where they brought a bunch of gun rights advocates and a bunch of gun control activists together. And they had them have conversations for 3 days. And then they sent them home and they created a Facebook group for them. And what they found is that the same tactics that worked face-to-face, they work exactly the same online. It's really important online to try and figure out, is this person having an emotional conversation? Are they having a practical conversation or a social conversation? It's really important online to prove that you're listening. Jim, thanks for writing that. What I heard you say here is, let me sort of like spell it out to make sure I understand it correctly. Those same tactics work really well online. The difference is that we have to change a little bit how we use them online, just because we don't have the face-to-face bandwidth, the being able to see someone's expressions, the being able to hear their tone of voice. But we can learn to do this really easily. One of my favorite examples of this is that about 100 years ago, when telephones first became popular, there were all these studies that were published that said no one's ever going to have a real conversation on telephone. Right up till then, all conversations had happened face to face, sometimes through letters, but oftentimes those were prolonged conversations. And people said, look, if you can't see the person, you're never going to be able to have a real conversation with them by voice over the telephone. If you can't hear their tone of voice with perfect clarity. And what's really interesting is that for the first 15 years or so, they were exactly right. If you listen to early transcripts of early telephone conversations and you look at them, what you see is that people didn't know how to use telephones. They used them like telegraphs. They would call someone up and they'd say, here's my grocery order, and then hang up the phone right away, right? But what happened is that eventually we learned how to use phones. And by the time all of us on this call, by the time we were in middle school, we could have conversations for like 7 hours a night on the phone with our friends, and they were the most important conversations of our life. So what changed there? Well, what happened is people learned the rules of using a telephone. And what's interesting is you know those rules without even knowing it. If I was to listen to you talking on a phone, what I would see, according to studies, is that you would over-enunciate your words by about 20%. You would put about a third more emotion into your voice than you normally do when you're speaking to someone face-to-face. Now, you're not doing that on purpose. You're not even aware that you're doing it. But part of your brain, your near conscious, has kind of learned when I'm on the telephone, I need to over enunciate and I need to put a little bit more emotion into my voice so they know what I'm feeling because they can't see me. We are right now learning the rules for online communication, right? Even email hasn't been around that long. And as we're learning those rules, we're getting better and better and better at it. We're getting better at figuring out how to match each other. We're getting better how to prove that we're listening. But what's important is that we remind ourselves of the rules before we have a conversation. Before we text someone, we say, look, okay, now I know that a text is different from talking face to face. I know that it's different from sending an email. Like in this text, I probably shouldn't make a sarcastic joke because they're not going to know that it's sarcasm. They're going to take me seriously. And so just by taking a second to remind ourselves of the rules of different channels of communication, then that helps us a lot, particularly with online communication.
Mm-hmm. Throw in a couple extra emojis so they know you're joking.
Exactly.
So earlier you made the comment that people involved in sales and maybe negotiation they're trying to close deals and not necessarily have conversations. And Jerry from Westland Public Library is saying, in sales, repetition of an idea or a phrase is key to get an idea across or make a sale potentially. Is that something that you recommend for conversations with people in your day-to-day life? You talk about the concept of looping for understanding. Would that be similar to repetition of an idea?
So looping for understanding is a little bit different. I'll get to that in a second. So I think I mean, yeah, coming back to an idea is interesting. Like in this conversation that you and I have been having, Brandon, we've come back to ideas a couple of different times, right? But we come back to them in different ways. It's not like I'm saying, you should buy my book. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, actually, if you want to find that out, you should buy my book, right? There's a real difference between me just saying I want to repeat an idea and taking an idea and playing with it and giving it more depth and breadth and significance. And so I think that's always a good idea in a conversation. That's kind of what a conversation is, that we start talking about that movie and, and then you mentioned that you like Tom Cruise and have you seen this other movie? And then we come back to Mission Impossible, which is what we started talking about in the first place. I think that's totally fine. Now, you mentioned looping for understanding, which does involve repeating the idea, but it's a little bit different. Looping for understanding is a technique for proving that we're listening to someone.
Okay.
Right? And it has these 3 steps. Step 1 is I'm going to ask you a question, preferably what's known as a deep question, something that asks you about your values or your beliefs or your experiences, which is easier than it sounds. So I'm going to ask you that question, step 1. Step 2 is I'm going to let you answer that question. And after you answer the question, I'm going to try and restate what you told me in my own words. And the goal here is not mimicry. The goal here is to prove to you that I was paying attention, that I'm thinking about what you just told me, that I'm saying, oh, here's a follow-up question, or, you mentioned this thing before and it's kind of related to what you just said, right? To prove to you that I'm thinking and processing about what you're saying. And a lot of us do step 1 and step 2 intuitively, right? It's just something that we've learned to do. It's step 3 that I always forget, which is after you've repeated their idea, ask them if you got it right. Like, did I understand you correctly? Am I understanding what you're trying to tell me? Because in that moment, what we're actually doing is we are asking them for permission to acknowledge that we were listening. And when you acknowledge that I was listening, you become much more likely to listen to me in response. Mm-hmm. So this looping for understanding, these 3 steps, that's a way to repeat an idea, but do so in a way that makes us feel like we're hearing each other better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned that step 3 is the one you always forget.
Yeah.
So what happens in that instance? You do step 1, you ask them a deep question. Step 2, you let them know that you're listening by telling them, this is what I got from that. And then you forget the third one.
And then you forget that's okay. That's okay, right? Because then maybe they say, hey, I know that's not exactly what I meant, right? Sometimes they assume you asked the question without you even asking.
Sure.
But you can also get in the habit of it. Like I find that when I'm in conversations, I say all the time, am I getting that right? Am I hearing you?
Yeah.
Right? It just becomes a habit. The more we practice it, the easier it gets.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that I looped back to that.
Well done. Good job.
Okay. So Zachary says, when greeting someone for the first time or even an old friend, we did get a lot of these questions. What's a better question than the usual, how are you doing? That reflects the idea from Supercommunicators of matching the type of conversation to spark a more meaningful connection.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Zachary. It's so this happens a lot, right? Where we see someone and we automatically say like, hey, how are you doing? And that's okay. That's all right. Because sometimes it's just a way of saying like, hey, like it's nice to see you, right? They know that like what we're actually doing is we're starting a conversation. But I had mentioned before this thing, deep questions.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? Or what's going on with you? That's a pretty shallow question, right? Deep questions are things that ask us about our values or beliefs or experiences. And that can sound kind of intimidating, but it's as simple as if you meet someone who, for instance, is a doctor. Instead of asking them, what hospital do you work at? Asking them, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school? Right? That second question, what made you decide to go to medical school? It's just as easy to ask. But what it does is it invites the other person to tell us about who they really are, to tell us about their experiences and where they come from. And it's easy to do that in a conversation with an old friend or someone you meet for the first time. Oh, where do you live? I live in the Heights. Oh, really? What do you like about the Heights? Like, why'd you decide to move up there? Like that question, that opens us up to something real and meaningful. Now, the first question out of your mouth doesn't have to be a deep question, right? It can be like, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Work's going really well. Oh yeah. Like, I know that you're a lawyer. I was just wondering, like, what do you like about being a lawyer? Because it seems like a really interesting career. Now I'm asking a deep question. I'm giving that person a chance to tell me something that's meaningful and real. There's actually something called an experiment that was done that created something known as the fast friends procedure. And what it is these two researchers wanted to figure out if they could come up with a system to make any two strangers into friends. And so what they did is they went out and they got people, strangers, and they put them in a room, one by one, and they would hand them a list of 36 questions that they should ask and answer back and forth. And the first question started out pretty easy. The first question is, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world or from history, who would you have dinner with? That's not a big deal, right? But they get intimate pretty quickly. And they get to the second to last question is, when is the last time you cried in front of another person? And the researchers have found two things. Number one, they found you can get to those deep questions very, very fast. Like if you start by asking someone like, who would you have dinner with? And they say, oh, I'd have dinner with President Obama. You can say, what do you admire about Obama? He's such a fascinating character. Like what is it about him that makes him stand out for you? Right? That's a deep question. Now suddenly we're talking about our political beliefs. We're getting into like real stuff about ourselves. And that's really, really powerful. But the other thing that we've discovered is that when we have those conversations, we feel close to each other, even if we disagree with each other. Mm-hmm. Even if you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, or you love guns and I hate guns, or you think X is wonderful and I think Y is better. If we're having a conversation where we're asking and answering deep questions, the goal of that is not for us to agree with each other by the end. The goal of that is for us to understand each other. And we will feel closer to each other. We will become friends very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of super communicators. The book is the underlying thread is vulnerability and feelings and relationships and connecting. And Jeffrey from Jefferson County Library District is saying your earlier work, The Power of Habit, focused on internal change. Super communicators shifts to relational change. What parallels do you see between building good habits and building better conversations?
Yeah, I think having good conversations is a habit, right? Look, the first time you try and do looping for understanding, you might be worried about it. It might feel awkward to you. Mm-hmm. The third or fourth time you do it, it's going to feel like totally natural. And the 10th time you do it, you won't even realize you're doing it because it's become a habit. Conversations have so many rewards for us that if I asked you about some of the best times in your life, inevitably a huge number of them would be great conversations you had. And you know that feeling we get after a good conversation where we just feel better and we just feel like the world is okay and we feel good about ourselves, the person we were talking to? That's because our brain actually has a dopaminic reaction. It releases a reward sensation when we have a good conversation. So it's very, very easy to build communication habits. The key is that you have to be deliberate about it. If you're not saying, okay, here's how I want to communicate. I really want to pay attention to, is this an emotional conversation or a practical conversation? If you're not practicing it, it won't become a habit. But if you do practice it, you just say like, look, in this conversation, I'm going to try looping for understanding at least once. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask one person a deep question. And it's going to be a question that like normally I wouldn't ask, but I'm just going to push myself to do it. That's how we build those habits for communication. And if you do that once or twice, what you're going to find is next week or next month, you're doing it all the time. And it feels like the most natural thing on earth.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay to ask too, is it okay? Do you want support here? Or do you want me to just listen? Kind of like,
absolutely. No, my wife does that all the time. When I come home and I'm complaining about my day, she often says, okay, so do you want me to help you figure out how to solve this? Or do you want me just to sort of listen and you just need to get it off your chest? And I would say, I just need to get it off my chest, right? I just want to vent. We don't have to come up with any solutions to this. I just need to like complain about this for a little while. It's always okay to ask, what do you need from this conversation? How can I communicate with you best? And when we ask, the other person oftentimes knows what they want and they tell us. Mm-hmm. And then we can tell them, we can say to them, Actually what I need is I need you to help me think through this problem. I don't need you just to listen. I need your solutions and your practical knowledge.
I almost feel like it's easier to build the habit if you first get in the habit of saying, what do you need here? Do you need me to help you find a solution, or do you want me to just support you?
Yeah.
And then you just,
that is a habit, right?
Yeah. You just automatically start thinking about it. I really like it.
Absolutely.
Zachary says, what's the biggest misconception people have about communication?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception people have, I think there's two of them. The first is they just assume that some people are born great communicators and that others aren't. And that's entirely not true. For everything we've learned from research that tells us we can all be super communicators. The people who are really good at it, it's just because they practice it a little bit more and they think about it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But the other misconception is that the goal of communication is to transfer information, or it's to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm smart, or you should like me, or that I'm funny. That's not the goal of conversation. The conversation, spoken communication, it can be used to transfer information, but that's just like a nice side benefit to it. That's not why it evolved. It evolved to help us feel closer to each other. When you're in a conversation with someone, your body and your brain starts to change, right? Even in this conversation, even though we're doing this over the internet, our breathing patterns have started to match each other during this dialogue. Our heart rates have started to match each other. The dilation of the pupils of our eyes echo each other, even though we're in different places. And if we could see inside our brains, you and me, Brandon, what we would see is that our thoughts are looking more and more similar the longer we talk to each other. Within neuroscience, this is known as neural entrainment. And it's at the core of why communication exists. When we become neurally entrained, when our brains start to look alike, we feel close to each other. We feel like we can trust each other more. We feel like we can like each other more. And that's really, really important, because if I don't think I can trust you, it's really hard for me to work with you, to create a village with you, to go out and forage together. So the goal of communication is to create that connection. And if I tell you a funny story, or if you tell me an interesting factoid, or you help me think through a problem, if there's some information transfer that occurs there, all the better. But the reason why our communicative capacity exists is so that we can connect with each other. And that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Is neural entrainment, is something similar going on when you're thinking of emotional contagion? Is that something similar? You're syncing up with emotions?
Yeah, very similar, very similar. So emotional contagion is a very, very human instinct that if you are feeling something, I actually feel it a little bit myself. Mm-hmm. And that's neural entrainment, that when I describe what I'm feeling to you, you actually experience that a little bit. If I tell you about an idea, you experience that idea a little bit. That's neural entrainment. That's how we communicate.
Okay. So Vishnu from Guilderland Public Library is saying, while researching supercommunicators, what was one surprising finding that completely changed how you personally talk to people?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Vishnu. So, the thing that I've tried to do is I've tried to spend a lot more time looping for understanding. I just kind of assumed that people knew that I was listening to them, like my kids and my wife, and I wasn't really proving to them that I was listening. So now I spend a lot of time trying to prove that I'm listening to you. So if I have a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, and if my 17-year-old says like, hey dad, here's this idea that I have in X and Y and Z, instead of just assuming he's asking me for advice on, how to do it, I say, hey, Ollie, that's a great idea. Like, let me repeat back what I heard you say to make sure I understand it. You want to build this thing because you think it'll really help you and your friends have a project together. Am I getting that right? Am I hearing you correctly? Yeah, that's what I want. And then I might ask, do you feel like, do you want to talk about how to do that? In other words, do you want to have a practical conversation? And he might say, no, I have an idea. Let me tell you my idea, right? He's not looking for a practical conversation. He's looking for me to empathize and to support him. And so I would say that's been the biggest change for me, is I spend a lot more time trying to loop for understanding, trying to prove that I'm listening, because I think it helps bring us closer together.
Yeah, That's great. Diana says, in these fraught political times, do you recommend trying to communicate with people whose views or belief systems are different from yours, or steering clear of politics? I'm thinking specifically of Thanksgiving with my family, Diana says.
So I think you should absolutely talk about politics, right? But the way to do it is not to say, why do you still like that guy? Like, why do you like that candidate? He seems terrible. That's not really opening a conversation. That's an attack, right? Or, I know that you're like a bleeding heart liberal, so you probably won't understand this, but
Okay.
I have to pay taxes, so I'm right. Those aren't really conversations; those are attacks. So, what is the way to have that conversation? Is to say, "Hey, Uncle Joe," right? Crazy Uncle Joe thinks that lizard people run the government. Hey, Uncle Joe, I'm just wondering, if this seems like an important topic to you, can you tell me a little bit about why it's so important to you? When you think about, let's say he's a big Trump supporter. When you think about Trump, like, what is it about him that makes him special for you? What I'm doing in that moment is I'm doing two things. Number one, I'm signaling I actually want to understand how you see the world. This isn't me trying to like get into a debate that I'm hopefully going to win. We definitely disagree with each other, but that's okay. This is about us trying to understand how the other person sees the world. That's number one. And number two, instead of making it some big, national question, I'm making it a personal question. What does this candidate mean to you? What does this issue mean to you? And inevitably, what they're going to say is they're going to say something that it's easy for you to relate to. They're going to say something like, I really worry about like AI and the world changing so fast. And it seems like this candidate that like he's the only one who seems to care about what I'm doing. And that having someone tell me that's really powerful, because it means that now I understand what you're feeling. And I felt that myself. And I might disagree with you about who we should vote for in order to feel safe, in order to feel like we're in control. But now we know what we have in common. And that's a common area for us to move forward.
Mm-hmm. And then you can continue that conversation, even if they give you an answer that you didn't like, by just asking more questions,
Exactly.
trying to better deeply understand.
That's exactly right.
Great. Thank you. That's very good advice, I imagine, for a lot of people going into the holiday season. Rachel from Wilkerson Public Library says, what did you hope your book would accomplish with readers? And is there any one thing that people should keep in mind, if anything?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Rachel. And let me just say, I would love to hear from all of you. Like, I would love to have a conversation with everyone on here. And you can email me if you just go to charlesduhigg.com. That's my website, has my email address on it. I'd love to hear from you. I mean, the thing that I really hoped for was that people would have better conversations. Like, I don't think I'm saying anything that none of us realize to say. We are living during a hard time, right? Like, our nation used to be really good at having conversations, and we've forgotten sometimes how to do it. And the thing I love about libraries is libraries are the best of our human instinct, of our democratic instinct, right? Libraries are where we go to learn from the ancients and the currents, to have conversations with people that we might not bump into otherwise, to get a chance to hear about ideas that we haven't heard about before. Libraries, by its virtue of being open to everyone, are the places where we can have some of our best conversations. And what I'm hoping is that this book gives people a few skills, a few tools. And the book's filled with great stories and a lot of, CIA officers and how doctors convince people to get certain procedures, or convince them not to get procedures. And the reason why the Big Bang Theory, that TV show, did so well has a lot to do with how they communicate. It's filled with great stories, but most importantly, it's filled with skills. It's filled with skills about, this is how you have a tough conversation. This is how you talk to your Uncle Gary. This is how you ask for a raise. This is how you get to know a stranger on the bus. This is how you get to know your friends better. That's what I'm hoping people walk away with, is I'm hoping they walk away with some additional skills, and that they get to practice them in places like a library, where we get to meet our fellow citizens and hopefully make the world a better place.
I love that. We have a lot of people asking about your journey to becoming a writer and a New York Times bestseller. Do you care to talk about that with us a little bit?
Oh, sure. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and after college I started a company there, and I realized pretty quickly that I didn't know anything about running a company, and so I went to business school outside of New Mexico, and halfway through being in business school, we sold the company. And so suddenly I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I came to business school to run this company, and now we sold it. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do next. And so I sat down and thought about, like, what do I really love to do? And I love writing. I worked for my college newspaper, and I just always enjoyed writing. And I thought to myself, the fun thing about being a journalist is that it's your job to learn something new every day. Like, if you're doing the job correctly, every single day you learn a new fact, a new skill, a new way the world works. And I figured to myself, that will always be interesting to me. So I decided to become a journalist. I was the lowest paid member of my graduating class from business school for like the next 7 years. And then me and my wife had our first kid. And I was living in New York City. I was working at the New York Times. I wasn't earning that much money. And I was like, I got to earn more money. Like, I have no savings. So I decided I was going to write a book. And I came up with this crazy idea with my wife. My wife's a scientist, that we were going to find 12 studies about, like, how to be more successful. And we're going to try and live by one of those studies each month during the first month of our first year of our child's life, which anyone who has kids knows that is ridiculous. Like, you are so overwhelmed when you have a kid, you're not thinking about, like, oh, here's this study. And so I went and I talked to this agent about it, and she was like, that's not a good idea. But month 4 was going to be like trying to improve my habits and looking at the science behind habits. And she was like, that is actually enough for a book. Like, if you just dive deep into habits, and that became The Power of Habit. And it did really, really well. I was really lucky. And I discovered that I love writing books, and I love talking about my books. And it's just a nice way of moving through the world. And so that was my journey to becoming an author. And I've felt incredibly lucky and fortunate to be able to do it since then. Mostly because of wonderful people like you, people who care about books, who read books, people who work in libraries and visit libraries. I used to serve on the board of the Brooklyn Public Library and loved it, because the Brooklyn Public Library is as much a social good organization as it is someone who hands out books. I'm sure that's true for all of your libraries as well. Yeah. And so it's been a wonderful life. And I'm just so appreciative for it.
I love that. What a great story. So the last question actually, I'm going to ask Sonia's, because it did come in a lot. Future book plans. Paperback just came out. So what are you working on now?
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure it out. I want to write a book about AI, but I don't know how to write it. I don't know what the book is yet. And things are moving so fast and changing so fast that it's hard to figure out, like, what's a book topic about AI that's still going to be interesting 3 years from now or 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm spending most of my time thinking about.
Communication habits in AI? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. We'll find out.
Okay. So now, last question. What are you reading right now that everyone should run out to their library and check out immediately?
So, I just reread Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and it's been out for a while. It's one of my favorite books. What I love about that book is it's actually hard to read, right? Sometimes you don't know what's going on. You don't even know who's talking. It challenges me. And there's something about reading books that challenge us that just feels really good, right? It feels like it makes us smarter. So that's the book that I would say everyone should go read right now.
I love that. I just found that book in a little library near me.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to it. Okay.
And I apologize. There's actually someone walking up to my front door that I can see as they're walking up.
We're in wrap-up mode anyway, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining in today. This was such a treat for me.
Absolutely. Likewise. Have a good day. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
With that, I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning into our author talk today. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, if you scroll down below the live stream video, you can see the resources area, which contains a link to Charles' Charles's book, Supercommunicators. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us.